Hello, Warhawks. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 11.1. Chapter 11 starts to deal with circles, their arcs, their perimeters, which we call circumference, the measure of certain angles. We're just going to get started today, though, with a couple of vocabulary terms that deal with circles. So here we have some different terms. The center of a circle seems kind of easy to identify. That's just going to be the point that's actually right in the middle of a circle, and it's going to be named with a letter. And actually, whatever you name the circle with, or whatever the center of the circle is, that's how the circle is going to be named. Like if I said that this was, I wanted to name this circle, I would name it by its center. I'd call it circle A. So in this case, the center of that circle is located at A, and that also gives the circle its name. Another familiar word that we look at is a chord. A chord is a line segment that actually has its endpoints on the circle. So, like if I draw a line segment here that goes from one part of the circle to the other, that would be considered a chord. Like let's just say we'll call this CB, or I could even call it BC. But that would be an example of a chord. It just has its endpoints. It's a line segment on the end of the circle or the edge of the circle. So in this example, CB or BC line segment would be a chord. And then like a chord, but a little bit different, we get to what we would call a secant line. A secant line actually starts outside of a circle, and it's a line that goes through the circle and touches it twice. So it's actually going through the circle. See the difference between this chord here that starts and stops on the circle and this secant line that actually passes through the circle and touches it twice. We'll just call this secant line DE. So a little bit of a difference there between a chord and the secant line, but definitely some similarities. As we look down, we get into some new terms, some different terms here. One of those is a tangent line. This is a line that touches a circle only once, and the real important thing here is that it's perpendicular to the radius of a circle. For example, something like this could be a tangent line. It just touches the circle one time, and it's actually going to be what we would consider perpendicular. If we had the center of the circle and we drew a radius to a tangent line, we're actually going to create a right angle right there. Oops. Can't seem to get that right. But that would be an example of a tangent line. Makes a right angle with the radius of a circle. And we can name that with any 2 points that are on that line. We could say that it was maybe tangent line AB. But see the difference between tangent and secant is that a tangent line just touches the circle one time, just barely touches it. So we would say the tangent line here would be tangent line AB, and it would make a 90-degree angle with the radius of the circle. Another thing that you might hear about a tangent line is its point of tangency, which would be where the radius would actually meet that tangent line, or where the tangent line actually touches the circle. So it would be tangent at that point. You might even say, okay, that's tangent at point C, or that's its point of tangency. If we look at another type of line that's in a circle, or actually a line segment, we see the diameter here is really a chord, but it's a special type of chord that actually passes right through the center of the circle. We give it a special name because it does go through the center of the circle, and a lot of things in geometry are based on the diameter, or the radius would be half the diameter. So that is an important chord. We don't typically call it a chord, but it technically is one. But it's a line segment that goes through the center of the circle. So in this particular case with this circle, we could say that the diameter was XY, but it has to pass through the center of the circle. As we look down, we see some more terms that we have here. And let's talk about central angles. So we have the center of the circle. That's what this is based on, this central angle. And the central angle is actually created at the circle center. So you see, like, maybe even think of a slice of pizza or something, like they cut the pizza, and we would have a central angle that would be created right here because it goes in the middle of the circle. We maybe call this angle A, B, C, something like that. But that would be an example of a central angle. Now, you can have a lot of central angles in a circle, but technically that is what it's called there. Okay, so a little bit of extra credit for anybody that is watching this right now. The first person from each class to tell me who won the Super Bowl this year, I'll give you some extra credit on the last test we took. Actually, I'll give you 5 points extra credit on the last test we took. So make sure that you let me know that in class tomorrow, the first person from each class. So there's a central angle there. We look at another type of angle, which is called an inscribed angle. This is actually an angle that would be on the edge of a circle. So the angle's not in the center, but it's actually on the edge. We say that it's actually the circle inscribes that angle, and maybe we'll call this angle X, Y, Z is an example of an inscribed angle, or an angle that's on the edge of the circle there. So inscribed angle would be X, Y, always name an angle with its vertex, Z, or we could even call it ZYX. Okay, so those are our two types of angles that we have so far in the circles. We continue down just a little bit more, and we get into arcs. So we have different types of arcs. One arc that we could have, we would call just any part or any portion of the outside of the circle. So this arc that I'm making here is just an example of, it's a portion of a circle. It's on the circle's perimeter. It's actually part of the circle, but we're just talking about a small section of it, not the whole entire circle, but just an arc, a certain part of that circle. We have different types of arcs that we can have. This arc would actually be an example of what we would call a minor arc. The reason it's a minor arc is because clearly you can see that it does not go more than halfway or even halfway around the circle. So I'm just going to call this arc A, B. We name an arc much like we name a line segment with its endpoints, and then we put a little arc above it, or a little rainbow-looking thing above it, and that lets us know that this is arc AB. We're just talking about that part right there. Now you might say, well, what if I said AB? What if I was talking about the other part, all this, instead of that little part? What if I talked about from A here all the way around to B? Well, that's a very good question. I know that it's a minor arc because it's only listed with 2 letters. That's very important. That lets me know that I'm talking about the smaller portion of that arc. And then we get to something called a semicircle. Now, a semicircle actually passes through, or it is the endpoints of a semicircle are on a diameter of that circle. So if we were talking about a semicircle here, we would be talking about half of the circle. And that's a term that I'm sure you're familiar with here. Now, semicircles have to be named with 3 letters. Like we might call this X, and somewhere else there's a point, Y, and then maybe Z over here would be an example of a semicircle. Now, I have to name it with 3 letters because if I just said XZ, I could be talking about this part, or I could be talking about this part. So we name it with 3 letters. If I say XYZ, now I know I have to be talking about this section of the circle. So that would be semicircle X, Y, Z, or you could even call it ZYX, and it's still going to get an arc symbol there. But that's a special kind of arc. It's a semicircle, half the circle. And then the last type of arc that we talk about would be an arc that goes more than halfway around the circle. Again, this is going to be named with 3 letters. So maybe here I'm talking about this arc starting at Z, going all the way around here, goes past X to be more than half the circle, and maybe it ends at B. So really I'm talking about all this right here. So more than halfway around the circle. And a major arc is also named with 3 letters. You must have its endpoints, and then any other point in there. I could call it ZXB, or I could call it ZYB, or BXZ, or BYZ. Any one of those would suffice. I'm just going to call it ZXB. That lets me know which part I'm talking about. Again, if I only named it with 2 letters, if I just call it ZB, I might be talking about this part, or I might be talking about this part. But if I see 3 letters, I know that it's at least half the circle, possibly even more, making a major arc. All right, we'll see you in class.